Going to be deconstructing those immigration figures which have just landed.
670,000 in a year.
But first of all, before that, a sad story overnight. 2 migrants have died attempting to cross the channel in a small boat yesterday, while 60 asylum seekers were crammed onto this boat.
57 others were rescued by boat and taken back to France, and another was airlifted to safety.
Let's go now to Ray Addison, who is in Dover. Ray, what more details do we know? What's the very latest down there?
Yeah, good morning to you both. Well, the latest is that we know that a new attempt is currently being made. There's one small boat around about 1 kilometre from the French coast in the water, and that looks like it's struggling with the choppy conditions, and is actually looks like it's going to be heading back to the French coastline. What we understand about this fatality incident yesterday is that around about midday yesterday, several small boats attempted to make their way from the French coastline to the UK across the Channel. However, the majority were stopped by French border patrol officers. One, however, did manage to make it into the water. A number of sightings were shortly after made and reported to French authorities of people being in the water from that vessel and struggling. It's understood there was around 60 people crammed into one small boat. French authorities obviously responded very quickly. I believe they were assisted as well by UK maritime services too. However, there were 2 fatalities, a man and a woman who were both in their 30s. Another person was taken to hospital. It's not yet understood what condition they might be in. Now, of course, that is just the latest series of fatalities that we've seen in this very, very dangerous crossing, where there's been very dangerous conditions over the last week. The last large number of crossings was made on the 16th of November, when we had about 350 people come across. There was more attempts, though, yesterday when we saw the RNLI bring in a number of migrants to Dungeness port as well, and several people had to be, one person had to be stretchered off, and ambulances responded as well, with several people suffering from the effects of being in the water in that situation as well. Now, of course, we know that these statistics are coming out today. They were released at 9:30 this morning, and what they're telling us is that in the year ending September of 2023, there were just over 45,000 detected irregular arrivals to the United Kingdom. Now, that not all of those are small boats, small boat arrivals. However, 83% were, although we're being told as well that between July and September of 2023, detected irregular arrivals were 33% down than in the same period the year before. However, this of course comes will be no comfort.
Okay, thank you, Ray. Ray Addison there. Now, if you're just tuning in, we've got the latest net migration figures. They are 672,000 in the year to June 2023, up from 607,000 in the previous 12 months, but below a revised record figure of 745,000 in the year to December 2022. This is according to the Office of National Statistics.
Just let that figure sink in. 670,000 people in a year. That is a British city in 12 months. So it always gets us thinking, what would the ideal number be for net migration? What do you think?
I think it's really difficult to put a specific number on it, but I wouldn't want it to be much more than about 100,000, I think, net migrate. I don't know why, that just feels instinctively right. But when do we see it? We see it when we go to the GP. We see it when we take a kid to A&E and the queue is out of the door. That's when I always am struck by
We have traffic on the roads.
Awful traffic on the roads. It feels like there are so many people. We can't get enough rooms to rent, particularly in London. There are so many people that it means the prices of the rooms and renting has gone up enormously, hasn't it?
Most definitely. There's also an assumption that all the people coming are brain surgeons and nurses and rocket scientists. That's not the case. These numbers will impact the welfare bill for this country as well. Now, a certain level of legal net migration is probably beneficial for the economy. I mean, there's a direct link between economic growth and levels of migration. But I think that both Labour and the Tories over several decades now have rather sort of manipulated those figures in order to boost growth, but it's a short-term gain, because in the end, Our infrastructure is creaking. And as we saw in yesterday's autumn statement, the country's broke. We live beyond our means. How adding 700,000 people in a year or just under is going to help the economy is anyone's guess.
I don't know, Mark. And I think, you know what I'm seeing? I'm having some building work on my house at the moment. And it's very...
Conservatory?
No. It's not been done since I got divorced. It needed doing. Okay. It's very, very difficult to get labourers, builders, brickies, decorators. Now, you might say, well, that's a bad thing. But what the implications have been is, if you want your house doing, the implications is actually the wages for those people have gone up, which was one of the motivations behind Brexit, so that we wouldn't have lots of cheap labour here undercutting British-born plumbers, builders, carpenters, whatever, who want to do the work.
Yeah.
But it feels now, in looking at these numbers, well, who are these people? Who are the 700,000? Are they fulfilling the right skills that we need for people in this country?
Well, even if they are skilled, and plenty will be, the issue is, can the country cope? Our infrastructure, as I say, is absolutely creaking. The other issue you've got is over 5 million people in this country of working age who are not active in the economy. 1 million job vacancies out there. They should be filled by the Brits that we already have here. And we've got a culture of importing people to do the work that our own citizens won't do. Jeremy Hunt talked yesterday about how it's got to pay to work. Well, in this country, it still pays not to work.
It does. We're going to be digging into these numbers. As we say, this is hot off the press. These figures broke about 10 minutes ago now of this number. It's always interesting to see on a day like this how the government will spin these figures. What will the detail be that they can make something of to make some sort of political capital?
And we've spoken a lot about the economy, but what about our society, our culture? The principle of that many people coming in a year is bound to be unbalancing, bound to be disruptive for the equilibrium of our communities. That makes sense. Of course it does. And why does it make you a bad person to debate that? I mean, do you know what I think we need? I think we need a referendum. I know we've got a bit of a sort of bumpy history with referendums, but I think we need a referendum on levels of legal net migration.
I just can't imagine they would ever engage in such a democratic process at the moment. Mark White is here. Luckily, Mark, good to see you. Now, you've had these figures as well for about 9.5 minutes, I think, thereabouts. What do we know about the detail?
Right. So net migration obviously is the figure that everybody has been waiting for. We know that's 672,000, up from 606,000 in the last comparable figures. Less than what the ONS was estimating it would be, but still, it's a record figure. Boiling that down, it means that 1.2 million people came into the UK, 508,000 left. Now, when we look at the figures for who is coming in, what they might be doing. Work visas, 322,000 work visas were issued, but these also include dependents. We need to just boil it down a bit more to find out how many dependents. We've not found out yet, but I can tell you with student visas, they're at 378,000 student visas. Now that's up from 320,000 student visas in the last set of figures. And there we do have the number for dependents. So of those 378,000, there were 96,000 dependents. So a very significant chunk of people just attached to those students that have come in. 58,000 was the previous figure, so that's gone up to 96,000. The government is trying to ensure that that particular loophole is tightened up and that there is a set limit on the number of dependents that students can bring with them. Humanitarian routes, well, remember the last time we spoke an awful lot about what was happening with those coming across from Ukraine and Hong Kong and Afghanistan. Well, that this time has gone down. It was 157,000 the last set of figures. It's now gone down to 83,000. Still quite a number, many of them coming from the likes of Ukraine.
And probably that's the least contentious stat, wouldn't you say, Sarah Vine? 83,000 people genuinely fleeing war, fleeing for their lives. That's the point about our country. We're very tolerant and welcoming to people who face possible death or bad treatment. But what about those other figures? You know, skilled workers and students make up the bulk of it. Do we need those people?
Well, I mean, the thing is, I don't think anyone objects to people coming who, you know, from places like Ukraine and genuinely need our help, that's completely fine. Most people are okay with that. The figures on the student dependence the student visa dependence is quite interesting because, why do they need those? Why do they need to bring their dependents? It's not, my son's at university. I don't go and live with him in Cardiff.
Although I'm sure he'd love it.
He would love it because he'd get his washing done.
Well, that's it.
But
And you can keep an eye on him,
It's not necessarily a sort of... I think the thing that most people will think is that most people don't mind migration. It's just if they actually contribute and if they're paying taxes and if they're contributing to the economy. But of course the problem is a lot of these people are not. They're going to be actually placing a burden on us. It's nice that so many people want to come to the UK. It's a good sign for us. It means that we are still, very much a destination country for a lot of people. I think that maybe the student visa thing has something to do with the fact that universities are touting their courses so enthusiastically with foreign students because they get so much more money.
So that could be a mature student coming over here and therefore bringing their wife and children.
Yes, exactly.
Which makes you wonder whether they're genuinely here because they want to study or because it's an excuse.
They're probably doing PhDs or whatever, but that's fine. And if they are doing PhDs, they're probably going to be quite useful people to have around. But the other issue is, why have we got all these Brits sitting around at home doing nothing, and why are we importing people to do the work that they should be doing? That's the big issue, I think.
What else do we know, Mark?
It's a worry.
So we can talk about asylum. Now, these are slightly different to the breakdown that we'll get from the Home Office. Just to complicate it, as if the Office for National Statistics is not impenetrable enough, we also get figures coming out from the Home Office that give a breakdown on the asylum system.
Did the Home Office and the ONS release these statistics on the same day?
They do, yes.
And they are complementary but can be contradictory.
You put it very well. They are very confusing when you're initially just trying to inwardly digest them. But in terms of asylum, 90,000, according to the ONS, came into the country on asylum visas, so came in as part of an asylum claim.
And remind me what period of time we're talking about again, Mark?
We're talking the year to June this year.
Right, June
2023. Now that compares to 75,000 previously, so that's gone up as well. Now what we'll get from the Home Office in terms of their figures is always quite interesting as well. We know in terms of those coming across illegally in small boats, for instance, that it's pushing 28,000 now. What we don't know and what we should get an idea of is kind of breakdown of what countries are representative in those small boats. So for instance, Albania was down in the last set of figures about 90%, and the government says that is due in no small part to the agreement that they've got with Albania to quickly return people to that country. But we'll see. I've been told actually from sources on the other side of the channel that all that's happening with the Albanians is they're not coming on the small boats anymore. They're coming, they're being smuggled in lorries from Poland and the like. So
Albania's not a war zone, though.
It's not a war zone, no.
Here?
And lots of people go there on holiday and have a lovely time.
Yeah, exactly.
Sarah, your experience of being close to government for many years, do you feel that there is a will? Or is it just that it doesn't go down very well with the dinner party set, this kind of chat, does it?
It's a very difficult thing to frame well for governments because... Tony Blair had a sort of open door policy, largely because he thought if he let lots of people in, they'd all vote Labour, and then that would mean that he'd never get voted out of power. I mean, being honest, that was what that policy basically was. And so subsequently, anyone who tries to sort of talk about migration, people like Nigel Farage, who, you were saying earlier on, is on I'm a Celebrity and has been shouted at for trying to have a conversation about migration. It just gets framed as, oh, you're just a racist, you're just not a very nice person, you hate foreigners. And that's not true. The thing is that, a lot of people voted for Brexit because they wanted to be able to control levels of migration. And it's not as though, we're not saying, no, you can't all come here. Just we have to have a quota, and that quota has to be respected because otherwise the infrastructure of the country cannot really cope. And I think we see that every day in our public services. And Labour will say, oh well, the problem is that the Tories haven't invested enough in the NHS and stuff. They've thrown billions at it.
Yeah.
It's just that the client base, for want of a better word, of the NHS is so huge now because there are so many people. It's, if you're trying to deliver a service that's free at point of delivery and you've got so many people using it.
This idea that it's so interesting, I find it so interesting that politicians can't say they are in favour of low migration, even though they know it would be a vote winner. It regularly comes out, the top 3 things that British people feel most important, most strongly about. Brexit, to some extent, was the closest we will get to a referendum on the number of people we want to be able to freely come and live here. And the British public voted that we would like less migration. So I'm still not quite sure about why it's politically difficult to manage that.
Because it's just not very PC. It's, we're supposed to, you're supposed to say that everybody should be able to come here because, that's what we are. I mean, and the other problem is, and I think this is a really interesting argument, is that it's very difficult when people say, why are so many people coming to the country? Well, a lot of Brits don't want to do the jobs that those people are doing. Let's be honest about that.
Yeah.
They're coming here because they're prepared to do the things that British people don't want to do because they'd rather stay at home and take their benefits. So I think, Ian Duncan Smith is very interesting on this because he's been arguing for years and years and years that we need really proper, serious welfare reform. Yeah. Because the problem with Britain is that it is, even now that we're outside of the EU, so we don't have to offer people the same benefits as the rest of the EU, which is what we had to do when we were in the EU. Even now that we're out, we are still an absolute peach of a country to come to because you will get looked after. You won't, you will get benefits. You will get money given to you and thrown. And it's just the way it is.
Yes, and we're a very tolerant, welcing nation as well. So it's an attractive place to come.
You go to somewhere like, I grew up in Italy and France and Spain. And, people say, oh, Britain is a racist country. Trust me. Try going somewhere like Italy. People are horrible to foreigners.
Eastern European countries as well are very unwelcoming.
We're very, generally speaking, compared to the rest of Europe, we're actually very, very not racist, very welcoming. But the thing is that there's a limit because everybody has their limit, and you can't completely exceed that all of the time without people. I
just wonder, Sarah and Mark, whether Rishi Sunak and the government are hiding behind the small boats crisis, which in my view is a humanitarian, economic and national security disaster. But, the numbers drop in the ocean compared to these figures. And I just wonder whether that is the elephant in the room. And also the societal impact. OK, so Britain is a great melting pot. It's a diverse society. I think the most integrated society in the world, if you ask me. But it's not healthy, is it, for a country and a culture to have that level of net migration annually?
Well, it depends. If the people coming want to live in Britain and they come here because they like our country and they like our liberal democracy and they want to be part of it, fantastic. But if you're coming here because you somehow want to try and undermine that country and those values, then no. So again, there has to be, there has to be a line.
And that's where it becomes a political hot potato. Because what kind of impositions do you make?
You're right about the small boats. It's a dog whistle issue. It's very visceral. People see these awful tragedies happening, but it's not the small boat. In terms of net migration. In terms of figures, the small boats, as you say, aren't really the big problem.
When might we expect, Mark, to have a statement from the government maybe about this?
Oh, any time. I'm sure that there will be a statement. I think, just to go back to your point on the small boats, the difficulty about the small boats is it is a highly visible manifestation of the government's failure to get a control on its borders. But you're right, in terms of the actual migration figures, those coming legally into the country, they dwarf those figures on the small boats. I should say, we're told as well from the Home Office that 75,000 asylum applications, that differs from the ONS figures of those who came here having achieved asylum, that came and migrated to this country, 75,000, which is 10% lower than the previous year, they claim. In the year ending September, those a bit more figure, there were 5,500 enforced returns, which was an increase of 54%, but only 5,500 returns when you're talking about tens of thousands of people coming illegally each year into the country.
Super. Right, thank you.